Welcome again at Gaudeamus Muziekweek. This is the third day at our festival, which is a world reference for adventurous new music. Our public's so diverse, and we have people coming from classical, electronic, folk, pop, and when I mean all of these, from different origins, of course, classical, Western and Arabic and Persian and Indian, and all trends of new electronic music, which have such a diversity of different backgrounds and listeners at this festival. But we all have something in common, and that is our curiosity. We have this sense of adventure, a sense of risk. Yeah, risk because you might go to a concert and just not enjoy it. That's the case sometimes. And too bad. Try your luck next time. But some occasions, it really happens a couple of years later. That very same piece of music or that style comes back and you listen to it again, and indeed, you do enjoy it. Exposure to new music triggers this process. It activates something, some senses, and your perception sharpens. So at length, we learn to appreciate new music. And that is such a joy. That's something you can't measure. That's beyond cognition or reason. It's such an organic, intuitive, but of course, cultural process that you can easily be addicted to. 75 years Gaudeamus, experiencing and welcoming addicted listeners to new music. And all that public along these 3/4 of a century had one common characteristic. They had very curious ears. That's why we have decided upon the title of this series, Curious Ears. Maybe why this series of podcasts at all? Well, first, there's a practical reason. This year is very special, and those occasions to come together to comment what you just heard are very limited. So we wanted a couple of moments to discuss and talk about music, which is always so difficult, but it's also necessary to digest your experience, to compare to how other people perceive it. And then there's also another reason, which is more spiritual one. Exposure to new music is even more intense when it's personal and social. So listening to music that a good friend of yours likes, or you're going to a party and all of a sudden the music that plays is very different to what you're used to, or that wedding in which music has such a different meaning and a consequence on the behavior of people. So we wanted to propose this pilot, Explore How a podcast, a radio program, a personal audio work of art, causes this effect. So we launched 3 commissions for 3 very relevant artists, each in their own field of experience, and invited them to share their listening experience, knowledge, but most importantly, their passion. I'll introduce you to them in a minute. And I forgot to say hello, my name is Jonas Bisquert, and to introduce myself, I am a composer. I've worked together with Gaudeamus for the last decade in different projects. And last year, I presented this premiere of piece of my Nocturne in European waters. Exactly a year ago, was premiered during this festival, while we conducted a new seminar on musical diversity. And that seemed to please the audience and the organization. So they invited me to do it again. And now I work since January as a program developer at the Gaudeamus Music Festival, trying to propose new contents and new formats to communicate with the audience and to invite the audience to communicate and to share the way they listen. Enough about my presentation. I just want to contribute with 2 personal notes, anecdotes that can try and set the tone on how we learn to listen. I had a few, maybe many traumatic listening experiences. One of them was when I moved to Indonesia. I have a clear Spanish cultural root, but I moved there when I was in my 20s, sponsored by a scholarship by the Dutch government to research, study, and compose in the island of Java. When I arrived there, I had no idea what I was hearing. Classical Javanese music, traditional arts, theater, all those arts expression that takes place in Java. I had to start anew. I had to learn from scratch. All my previous and consciously assimilated concepts of melody, harmony, timbre, which is not applicable there. So you don't need to be a professional composer for that. Any head has sort of installed system of how to listen to music depending on what you've been exposed to. So 3 months later in Indonesia, it was possible. I didn't know how. It's a kind of autonomous process, but I did enjoy those long concerts from 9 in the evening to 5 in the morning, in which you do have a cup of tea and a smoke, and you listen very differently than to the music I had been exposed to before, where there is a theme and development and contrast and melody and harmony. And the other personal note I'd like to contribute with is my experience with the band Zonder Verblijfsvergunning, the band without a residence permit, a project I initiated in the Netherlands some 10 years ago, in which we play with refugees, musicians staying in the Netherlands, asylum seekers, and we facilitate the exposition of the background and the heritage, just to visualize that there is an enormous richness behind the culture that people bring with them. So I learned some Arabic, some Persian, some Somalian songs, and I quickly discovered how unable I was to appreciate much of what was going on. Sometimes it was a full hall full of maybe Arabic or Persian, Afghan people listening to their fellow countrymen singing, dancing, playing. And there were certain moments in which the whole hall went, wow, and I didn't know why. And something clearly happened that I had missed. And all these years had taught me to discover those subtle moments and to enjoy them a lot. I would invite my guests to share such moments in their lives, because their life is maybe richer than mine has been, and they have grown up in a different place where they later worked and assimilated different musical languages. And that's what we invited them to share with us. These magical moments of revelation and how they have influenced their musical language. We have 3 fantastic composers, performers. Secretly, I have listened to the podcast already, and I think our gamble this time has been very well achieved. I think it really communicates in an intimate tone with some knowledge, but also with some intuition and passion, how they feel about the music they chose. Let me please introduce you to, I'm going to move back so we can see them in a moment, Nai Barghouti from Palestine, Joël Bons from the Netherlands, and Eliana Echeverry from Colombia. Please join me. Joël is physically next to me in the Netherlands. Hello.
Hi.
We can see Joël here. We can see Nai with the white headphones, in case you don't know them yet. We can see Eliana with that beautiful midday sun in Bogota. Eliana, you're in Bogota?
Yes.
Nai in Amsterdam?
Amsterdam, yeah.
Not so far.
No.
Well, Utrecht with me. Thanks for coming. 1.5 meter, safe distance. How about alphabetically? Nai Barghouti with a B. Alif, Beta. Ahlan wa sahlan.
أهلاً وسهلاً. Good. مساء الخير to everyone. Good evening.
مساء الخير. Now, you did a fantastic podcast. Could you tell us the title? That was your choice of your podcast.
The title of the podcast was The Magic of Ornamentation. And the purpose of it was to introduce the Western ear to Arabic music and try to appreciate it on a deeper level.
Why ornamentation? How does that relate to your life? Where do you come from? Why ornamentation?
Well, I was born and raised in Palestine, and the main thing that I listened to as a kid was Arabic music. It was and still is my biggest passion. And with Arabic music comes a lot of ornamentation, as it's not only an additional element in the music, it's not an additional factor, it's actually a key ingredient in the music that really makes it what it is. And sometimes you can't even treat it as an additional thing. You can't even erase it. It just comes within the melody. So my whole understanding of ornaments grew with me as I grew. And the more I listened to Arabic music, the more I understood about ornaments. And then being a vocalist and a flute player, but mainly a vocalist, also gave me a new perspective about how I can introduce ornaments in my jazz education or in my Western classical education. How can these 3 things come together? So that was...
Excuse me, a very basic question. What is an ornament?
What is an ornament? A very good question. An ornament is, how to say that? I haven't. I had never
Maybe-
really thought about how to.
Maybe you
really
should
say
sing it instead of explaining.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. An ornament, so I can do la da 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 da, and I can do da 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 da. So it's kind of adding to the original note that you have, giving it maybe a note in front of it or before it. So it's like an introduction to something. Instead of just saying it as it is, you say it with a little bit of flavor, like a little bit of a spice or something.
Did you grow up listening to Arabic music which contained ornaments all the time?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the thing I listened to mostly in Arabic music was music from Egypt, which is called basically the tarab genre. It's the classical Arabic music, and tarab means ecstasy, and it's basically within the music that it makes you feel this with the ornaments and the spontaneity that the singer and the instrumentalists show on stage. That's basically what I grew up listening to.
And that was something you pinpointed, you referred to, these are the ornaments, or is something you thought about when you changed your context and came into a different musical background in which ornaments are different?
Mm-hmm. It was a mix of both. So for me, Arabic music just gave me an understanding, a very deep understanding of ornaments. But when I started studying jazz, I also realized that there were also ornaments in that. Very different, of course, but there was something similar that was really interesting to my ears as an Arabic person. It was very interesting for me to listen to these ornaments and try to find similarities between both of them.
Right. So you clearly chose that subject for a reason. It has accompanied you all your life.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you have the chance to reflect upon it and create a work of art, an audio piece of 15 minutes about it. What strategy did you develop? Is it for your composition? How was it like?
It was actually a bit harder than I thought. It was my first time to make a podcast, and it's very difficult to all of a sudden think about certain theories or things that I'm used to doing, I'm used to listening to, but I never really took the time to explain or to really think about it. So this podcast was a very nice experience and a nice opportunity for me to also think about what I do and not just keep doing it unconsciously. So I had to become conscious about many decisions that I make within my singing, within my improvisations. Why am I doing this? Why am I picking this ornament versus that one? It just gave me a lot of time to think about different techniques that I've been using and how I can illustrate that to an audience using words. And that was also very difficult, but very entertaining. I had a lot of fun actually with it.
For the listener to know, it's not only words, which are beautiful, but you also illustrate by singing, clapping, playing flutes. So you have a lot of musical illustration to
Lots
your ornaments.
of musical, yeah, exactly.
Shukran Jazeela, and feel free to ask questions. I'm going to introduce the next podcast makers, but you stay with us, you can talk.
I will. Okay.
I would invite the public following us on stream. There is a Q&A window. You can type your question. I have a fantastic technician here that can select them for us. And you can even tell your question live if you like in a while. But let's first introduce alphabetically again, Joël Bons. Thank you very much for being here. Goedenavond, hoe gaat het met je?
Heel goed, thank you. Very good. Hi.
Was it hard to reach Utrecht by car from Amsterdam?
Yes.
But train was wearing a mask and everything was not too attractive.
No, it's just, I thought it was easy, but it was not. It doesn't matter.
This is, again, strictly, I listened to your podcast and I knew Joël Bons, by the way, is not only a composer of Nomad and this piece that has been prized lately all over the place and played in different countries, but he's a charismatic leader of the new ensemble, which started how many years ago?
Too many. In 1980 we started.
1980. And the podcast is about your adventures in China at the end of that decade, beginning of the next. Right. So end of the 90s, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, which one of the biggest revelation in the history of new ensemble.
Well, thanks to Gaudeamus, I have to say. That's also why I choose this subject, because it was a very great opportunity that Gaudeamus director Chris Walraven at that time sent me to Hong Kong to attend the ISM World Music Days because they needed somebody, a representative from Holland. And I said, yeah, okay, then I would like to. And then I could travel to China. And that was a big dream. And it turned out to be a very great dream.
Could I reveal things you say in your podcast that great composers were discovered back then?
Well, you already did.
Didn't say the names yet.
Oh,
would you like to?
Whatever you like.
What happened? How come that at that time you discovered exactly the composer that would become well known just a few years later?
Well, I was so fortunate to be there at that time, but I won't say everything which is in the podcast, of course. But at that time, it was a special moment because people like Tandun, who probably everybody knows, they were still completely unknown. And
I was reserving that piece of information, but you revealed it.
Very, very young. And I had no idea who they were. I just met them, and they said, "Oh, you have to go to him, and and you have to go there." So after that, I visited all these guys that they told me to go there, and I discovered all these talents. And before, I had no idea whether there would be any composers in China at all. I thought 1 billion people, there should be also composers, but we didn't know at that time.
Could you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, how you grew up listening to what kind of music, and how that made an impact when you finally traveled to China in the 80s?
Well, yeah, again, I was very fortunate to grow up in a family of, my father was a graphic designer and my mother costume designer, and they were very interested in arts in general and very open-minded. So we had a very weird record collection. I grew up not with Beethoven and Bach, but with boogie-woogie, music from the Balkan, from Uganda, from Mexico, all kinds of different musics that I heard for the first time when I was listening to music. So only later I discovered the big Western tradition. So for me, it was very natural to always be interested in what happened around the world. And my parents, they also traveled around the world and also to China and sent me photographs and letters. And that was the times of Mao still, well, his later years. So it was very intriguing what was happening there in that country, this huge country with so many people. And it was very, very different from what happened here. So that was something which was always in the back of my mind. And when Chris Waravan said, somebody has to go there,
Then the tricky question to express with words: what is different in listening to Chinese music at that time in relation to all the music you had heard before?
Wow, what
timbre, the texture, the way they organize their material. Could you try and pinpoint some elements?
It's also a little bit of a pity to reveal, because if you don't know this music and you will listen to the podcast, you will hear a lot of it, and it would be nice to just discover it yourself, because
Sure.
it's a very strange mixture, I think, of at that period they had a lot of experience of their own music, folk music and so on, but they heard also stuff from the West coming in because of the open door politics. They grew up in that time, so they had no theory. They just heard, I don't know, Lutoslawski or Ligeti or stuff, and they absorbed these sounds, and they mixed it with their own fantasy and what they heard back then as folk music. So out came a very strange, for me, fresh clash of styles, and also very uninhibited. We in the West, with all our luggage, how do you call it, stuff on your shoulders, the whole history and all our thinking and Adorno and all that, it's quite difficult to write new music, at least in my time when I grew up. And we all had this problematic, and I studied in Germany, and there was always these questions and warum, why, and this note should be there for a reason and so on. And then you suddenly hear these guys who just approach everything with a total inhibition. Is that the word? Uninhibited approach, and with a passion, and that communicates very, very easily, I think.
It's, if I may say, but I think we have to make potential listeners curious to listen to your podcast. It's very sensorial. He engages in describing or underlining certain passages of the music you're listening to with us, which is fantastic, because then we're listening through his ears, and you tell us, look at this bassoon in the lower register climbing. Wow. And then you're moved by a soaring melody by some instrument, something you really take us with you in your journey. It's very sensorial, less intellectual, the way you talk about it many times.
Okay. Yeah, but I think intuition is very important, as we all know, and we probably all agree. But at that time, in our Western world, the rational side was very over emphasized. So it was very welcome for me to get out of my dead end street in a way. And yeah, I hope it's still, when you listen to it, it's, this time when we had the times of the Sacre and the Pierrot Lunaire, that was also a moment in history that it was hugely creative and exploded into all these fantastic pieces that still sound as fresh as they probably would have sounded then. And I think you have these moments in history that suddenly things come together and explode creatively.
Mm-hmm. So that's the moment Joel describes in his podcast. And then about the making of the podcast. When we first proposed the idea, he said, well, I can't really estimate how much work this is going to take. Is this something you talk in an evening? And then it took a while longer to prepare.
Yeah, it was actually real fun, as you said as well. I had to discover all kinds of things, and I made a little home studio with my microphones and Logic and so on, and old tapes. Because when I traveled in China, I had these old cassettes still that I never listened to, like me walking on the Bund in Shanghai or interviewing a composer. And I just had them still, but they were old cassettes, and I had to try to fix them to transmit them to to Logic. So I suddenly heard all this stuff back. So it was also a revisiting of my own past. So thank you very much for this.
What a trip. A pleasure. It's really worth listening. Thank you very much, Joel. Let's introduce Eliana Echeverry, currently at Bogotá. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo andan?
Hola. Bien, fine. How are you?
What's the time over there?
Just like noon.
Like noon, 25 past. Well, that doesn't really count.
25 past noon.
Yeah. How are things? Are you in lockdown?
We're not in lockdown now, but we have a bad number, so I prefer to stay in quarantine. Just to be safe.
Beautiful light coming through your window. Could you share with us the title of your podcast, Eliana?
Yeah, it's cumbia, the rhythm that enchanted, the rhythm from a river that enchanted a whole continent and beyond.
Right, so the rhythm from a river in Colombia, Magdalena River.
Yes.
That enchanted a whole continent, the American continent and beyond. To introduce Eliana Echeverry, she's a Colombian composer, and she also arranges a lot of traditional and folk Colombian music. She's been working for the most famous artists in Colombia and really traveling the whole of the Americas from Tierra de Fuego to Alaska and other continents. So she has a lot of experience in what it means to translate her native musical styles into big band or orchestras. You've been touring with Colombian singers as well, Eliana?
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what you have been in contact with, and then what you do now?
Okay, sure. I'm from Bogota, Colombia. This is the capital of Colombia. I will talk about a rhythm which is from a little town. So I am not from that town, but we as Colombians, we have like early touch with the rhythms, different rhythms in Colombia. So I am into cumbia and genre music and everything since I remember. So then I studied in the conservatory, in a classical conservatory, but my background was very influenced by popular music and folk music. Then I couldn't stay just in a Western classic music. Then I studied jazz, and it's like, we say it here, like a sancocho, like a soup made with everything you found in your fridge. So that is a little bit my background. And afterwards, I finished working with pop artists. Then I make arrangements for them, or maybe songs for them, or touring with them. So it's a very interesting path.
And you're doing this at the moment. You create, compose, and arrange folk music for different ensembles?
Yes. Actually, because of my education, I am able to write from piano piece, solo piano piece, to a big band and an orchestra, or something with DJs and I don't know, like a live orchestra, rock orchestra, things like that. So that's pretty fun because it's like I have many tools to play. So different tools can transmit different message. So that's the main point for me.
And you chose cumbia in particular. There's more styles in Colombia, right? Than cumbia.
There's a lot of styles, but this is the most famous style, and this is the one which has reached most importance in the world.
Nai, Joel, have you ever danced to cumbia?
No.
I haven't, no.
There's a
but
lot
I'm
of
very
potential.
curious now. Yeah.
I'm really sure that without knowing that, I'm really sure that
Probably, yeah.
If you told that this is actually cumbia and we didn't know, like that, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. How was the making of the podcast? Was it a nightmare? Was it fun?
That was a journey because it was a wide subject. So I wanted to show you the origins and how it has changed in time and how you listen it now in pop artists, for example. And it was quite a journey. So it was like, okay, revisiting the music of my childhood, and then listen to the music now and say, okay, this is the right sample, because I had many examples and I was like, okay, I want to show you all of them, but I needed to choose like one or two. That was the most difficult part, because I am very passionate about that music, and it's okay, I don't have enough time to show all of that.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. We're curious. This is a pilot. This is the first time we propose such a commission to 3 artists that actually normally make music and compose a piece of 1 hour long, 10 minutes, depending. And so we thought somehow they can manage time, right? So if they come up with a radio program, it has some structure. It probably has development and moments of excitement, as composers think that you should organize time in a logical or exciting way for the listener to digest when you listen to it. This is a question for you 3. Is that the way you approach it? Or it turns out that speech and telling stories has a different dimension, strategic dimension than composing? Who wants to start this open question?
It was a mix of both for me. It was sometimes very structured, and now it's time to make something very interesting. Now it's time to do this. And I had this initial plan before I started actually recording with the main parts that I want to address. But of course, like with Arabic music, it's very spontaneous. So at times I was improvising and doing unexpected things that just came to my mind.
Like metaphors?
Like food metaphors, partly because I was very hungry, which, by the way, never make a podcast when you're hungry. It's not a good idea. But yeah, lots of food metaphors, things like that just popped up. And I said, you know what, why not? Why make it so, formal when I can just be myself?
Did you have to trim the original script for a certain duration?
No, actually, it was exactly, I think, 48 or 49 minutes. So it was good.
Eliana, yours was a bit longer. Is the longest of the 3, I believe, 1 hour and a quarter.
Wow.
That went out of hand. You started your narrative.
Yeah, I think it was because of that, because as cumbia reflects the landscape and the spirit of the people who live where cumbia was born, I tried to narrate that and to make you feel in that place. So I needed to be super descriptive and things like that. I turn a little bit poetic sometimes. I don't know, and of course it takes time in the narration.
And it makes sense. It's this laid-back Caribbean rhythm with your beautiful Colombian accents and your speech that gets you into the style. So I think it's very, very achieved. Joel, how about your experience in design?
It's very much, I found out, like composing, because you take thousands of decisions, small decisions, while you're composing, at least the way I do it. you start with something that's still very embryonal, or whatever you call it, very small, and then you start thinking about it, and so on. So it's a whole journey, and a discovery also. That's what I like about it. It's an adventure. And so I had no program. I only, of course, knew this and that should be in it. But then you find out so many things, and there's so many unexpected stuff that is happening. But what you say is true. You're dealing with time, and it has to be somehow very structured in time, or at least there has to be a dramatic structure so that you keep the attention. So that was a lot of trial and error, and you're actually editing all the time, editing like hell. So because you have to also, and I had to find my tone. At first I was too much David Attenborough starting to talk about, trying to find, how do you do that actually? How do you present something you love without being a kind of strange actor that has never studied acting? So that was also a journey. I found it very interesting to do all this.
This happened with composers, but I never made a podcast. I wish I would have a commission sometime. That you start developing one part of it and it becomes too big, and then you see it in proportion. So you constantly have to zoom in and zoom out.
That's what I did.
Judge from the small and the big scale.
Yeah.
It happened to you as well.
To me, certainly.
Nai, Eliana, and Joël, that you had to readjust your original plans.
Yeah, for sure.
I forgot asking the title of your podcast. Could you share it with us?
Forgot it. No, a miraculous outburst of creativity.
Not only that, but New Ensemble meets.
It's about my first trip to China, and then what came out of it was the collaboration between the New Ensemble and these Chinese composers. But there was so much more that I could say. For instance, when they came to Holland for the first time, some came from China and couldn't speak another word, other language, and we could not speak Chinese. So they were just taking their instruments, which they brought them, and explaining them live to us how we should play them. This is not in the podcast, so I can tell it now. And so there were so many details that I suddenly started to remember, and you have to shift and to all the time, as you do with composing, kill your darlings all the time. A lot of killing here.
I would suggest that we listen to a little teaser of each of your podcasts and have an idea of the tone and the rhythm.
I changed the tone since you...
That's true. Joel's teaser came before the final version, so you're going to hear the one but last. Even more beautiful. Oh. Let's start again alphabetically. Nai, the magic of ornamentation. Think about it, please, viewers on the streaming. You can participate. You can drop questions on the Q&A window. You can chat, I believe. There's a lot you can do. Please participate, because we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes for you. And while you listen to Nai and Joël and Eliana, think about something you'd like to know, and then later it's too late. Because at 8 o'clock, we have the next concert in this festival by Iranian composer Amin El-Brahimi, a Rumi cycle, beautiful 7 valleys of the Rumi book Al-Masnavi, composed and freshly premiered tonight at this building, Tivoli Vredenburg in Utrecht. So we're going to have to stop by 5 to the latest. Think of your questions. If we may, please have the first teaser of Nai Barghouti's podcast.
Hello everyone, my name is Nai Barghouti and this is the magic of ornamentation. What are ornaments? Ornaments are the milk to your cookies, the butter to your jam, the spices to your rice, well, not if you're Dutch, and the zait to your za'atar, if you're an Arab and know what that means. Ornaments are not only delicious additions, but vital ingredients to make the perfect dish. Okay, maybe enough with the food metaphors, I'm kind of getting hungry. In simple words, ornaments can have a significant effect on the way music is performed. It can transform a melody from a certain genre and switch it entirely into another, using only one different ornamental approach or technique. As Robert Donington wrote in his book, Baroque Music, Style and Performance, ornamentation is more than decoration. It is a necessity. There has to be enough of it and of the right kinds. Although it was written about Baroque performance, it is also highly appropriate for Arabic music performance. Donington adds that sometimes playing without ornamentation is equal to playing the wrong note. Lamia Al-Farouqi, in her paper on the performance of taqsim, or improvisation, in Arabic music, goes further and states that ornamentation in Arabic music is the raw material and not the decoration, but the content of the piece. So as you heard in the beginning, Beethoven can easily become Bet Eastern.
Thank you, Nai. That's beautiful. You're a singer, so you must hear your voice more often. You don't freak out when you hear yourself speaking, or do you?
I really do. It's very different. Yeah.
We strongly advise joggers or travelers by car to play this with good quality. It has lots of historical samples as well that Nai brought to us by Fairuz, Kulthum, the classics of Arabic music, but also incursions into contemporary jazz and looking at ornamentation also in a Western and different cultural context from the Arabic perspective, which is very nice to witness how she tells us from her point of view. Viewers, please drop your questions before it's too late. While we listen to Joël Bons' podcast, An Outburst of Creativity When New Ensemble Meets Chinese Composers.
It is 1989. New music lovers from everywhere have gathered together for the Gaudeamus New Muziekweek. On stage, a young Chinese composer. Behind him, a large orchestra. He sings into the piano. Audience and musicians listen spellbound. This is the then totally unknown Tan Dun. His piece on Taoism creates a sensation at the festival. A contrabassoon emerges from the lowest register, together with a damped piano and subtle percussion. Following the vocal evocation of the beginning, it creates a musical world we had no idea of.
Thank you, Joël. Have it changed that much since then?
Only the tone, I found it a little bit like this. But it's funny that you play it now as a teaser, because this is really the start of the whole thing. And then I start telling things. So here you have the trial and error thing that I thought, oh, it's maybe good as a beginning. So let's leave it like that. And then out of that...
Good illustration. That's a lot of music to listen to as well in your podcast. So please join the experience. Shall we listen to Eliana Echeverry's podcast teaser? Help me remember the title. the rhythm from the Colombian river that conquered the hearts?
Then a continent and beyond. You can
Right.
say cumbia, and that's fine.
Cumbia, which you'd all know by now.
Yeah.
In a lost land in the middle of the Caribbean, the paradise itself where magic and reality blends, the main character is the river of the Magdalena, a river that inspires dance, music, and imagination of its people. People as old as time, who learned how to live in the land and also in the water, who coexist in peace and equilibrium with Mother Nature. This amazing land inspired the Colombian novel Gabriel García Márquez the most fantastic stories that recreates the magnificent spirit of La Ciénaga Grande de la Magdalena, the birthplace of the Colombian music. I am Eliana Echeverry, a Colombian composer, and join me in this journey from the river to the world with a rhythm that broke the course of music in Latin America and is enchanting the entire world.
Va subiendo la corriente con chinchorro y atarraya, la canoa de bareque para llegar a la playa. Va subiendo la corriente con chinchorro y atarraya, la canoa de bareque para llegar a la playa. Habla con la luna, habla con la playa, no tiene fortuna.
Thank you so much, Eliana. You recognize yourself too?
Yeah, it's kind of weird to listen to myself.
Live stream chat, question for Nai. You have such a wonderful voice. I wanted to know where your inspiration comes from.
Wow, thank you. My inspiration, it's huge, actually. I mean, my biggest inspiration is Arabic music, like I mentioned. Fairuz, Ziad Rahbani, Egypt, Kulthum, all these legends, of course. This is what I grew up listening to. But now it's also different people. Bobby McFerrin, lots of konako singing, which is a technique used in Indian classical singing. Different things, yeah.
We were lucky, but it's also sad that all your concerts stopped by last March, and otherwise you wouldn't have made it to this occasion because you were booked like daily for years. Is it starting again? Do you get some live concerts, even if there's half of the audience allowed in the hall?
It's coming up again, mostly for the new year, not really anything for 2020 because it's mostly online things, but I really do miss it, and I hope it will come back soon.
It has taken you to all of Europe and beyond using Eliana's language?
Yes, it really has. I'm so grateful for that. Yeah, Middle East, Europe, the US. I was really fortunate to meet so many incredible musicians from different parts of the world, and I can't wait to do that again.
Well, thanks to this crisis, now we have your podcast for history. Otherwise,
thank you for the opportunity.
Had time to make it. Thank you so much, Joel. What keeps you busy after this podcast?
Oh, I have to write a piece, various things, and so a lot of stuff. Produce a CD of a piece that I wrote, and I would like to make another podcast.
Really?
Yeah,
that'd be lovely.
I think it's very nice. Yeah.
So if the makers liked it and the audience grants us the continuation, we could again have another edition next year.
I think it's a great idea. Also the way you formulate it, the curious ears, and it. How do you listen? It's very interesting.
It's a very tricky question. It can be cheesy, creepy. It can be
like this, but once you
too intellectual. But yeah, sometimes if you speak with too much passion, you find yourself as overacting. It's very hard to get the tone, I guess, from what I could find. I'd love to, but it's tricky. It's like composing. You do suffer a little bit, but well, we like it in a way if we spend our life doing it. Eliana, you should have been actually in London for a postdoctorate at Trinity Laban. Great chance you had. You postponed that for next year?
For next year, yeah. It's a huge opportunity, and I decided to take advantage in the best way I could. And this is not the time to go to concerts or to meet other musicians, things like that. So I decided just to wait.
Right. We'll wait for you with open arms. They just inaugurated the new direct train line from Amsterdam to London in one go, 4 hours. So we'll be close by. You don't even need to fly.
Well, that would be great.
Live stream chat, question for all three. Do you think the music you grow up with will always be the closest to you?
Ladies?
And gentlemen?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, I just listened again to, my brother came home with Ornette Coleman, something else with a big exclamation mark, jazz saxophone, so fantastic. And I just listened back to it, and you know every note, the music that you hear in your childhood. I grew up also with the Beatles and so on, and all these details, they're for the first time. Every experience you have for the first time is really mind-blowing, I think. So this keeps always fresh in when you revisit it, but even it forms you very much, I think.
Clear, yes. Eliana, Nai?
I think so too. Yeah, I think as much as I love so many different genres of music, and right now I don't know what's really purely Arabic or purely jazz or in my style, but it will always be the roots, the strongest roots in my background will always be Arabic music, and it will always be the closest thing to my heart.
That applies for cumbia as well.
I think in a subconscious level, yes, because as Nai say, it's like, okay, you can listen to different music and do different music in your life, but when you, for example, for me, when I listen to a drum, a Colombian drum, it's like immediately, it's like, okay, back to my roots, and this is feel like home. But it's deep. It's not rational. It's like it happens immediately.
But it doesn't mean that you lose your curious ears. Huh?
Sure
Yeah.
not.
When time goes by.
Like Mahatma Gandhi said, learning until the day you die, and enjoy as if it was your last day, but learn as if you were going to live forever. I believe something like that. If I may also answer that question, when I went in my 20s to Java, and after the second, third month of disorientation and listening challenges, I found myself spontaneously singing my childhood songs in Castilian in the region where I come from, unconsciously when traveling by bus and singing those old songs in the modes I grew up with. So there's some system that triggers your memory to the first things you learn. But now I could not imagine myself without listening to classical gamelan. So it's like a second childhood when you learn to listen a new style again. You really miss it after some time. We're almost done. Nai, Eliana, Joel, anything else you'd like to add? Any suggestion, question for each other, complaint, anything?
Complaint? No. Well, it's a bit obvious, but I want to thank Gaudeamus so much because it's 75 years, and we with the new ensemble, we wouldn't have existed without Gaudeamus, because again, Chris Walraven supported us from the very first day, and we did our whole first concert series with the budget of Gaudeamus, and then we played a lot of festivals, and also winners like Mauro Cardi in 1984, and even in 2011. The winner, the Japanese composer Onishi. And so Gaudeamus is so incredibly important. Now again, coming up in this difficult time with ideas like these that trigger us from different generations, but hopefully also listeners. I think it's of paramount importance that Gaudeamus continue its great work.
Hopefully. We have 4 different backgrounds here, and we share that curiosity and the ability to keep listening to new music. And that's what Gaudeamus stands for, year after year. I need your permission, if you can approve this text, to describe the series of podcasts. And it's going to be ready the next minutes at Gaudeamus' website. You could just click and not only get the teaser, as you did, but the whole podcast by Nai, Eliana, and Joel. And it's also available on iTunes, SoundCloud, whatever devices you have. We would like to write this description, but we could modify it if you object. The way we listen to music is highly determined by a predominant musical exposure during our youth. Tuning system, rhythm, form, timbre, ornaments are all unconsciously assimilated, shaping how we will pay attention when listening. The adult ear misses many of the subtleties, I borrowed that word from you, subtleties, of radically new musical input. Whether that is flamenco, that is my own harvest, opera, Carnatic music, Javanese gamelan, spectralism, the first times we really listen, our attention is reluctant to engage. For curious ears, this is an attractive challenge. Their intuition tells them there must be something precious behind that first layer of sound I can't barely follow. What's more, listening skills are contagious. That day you witness your friend crying with an opera aria, or attended a wedding where everybody clapped and danced flamenco, or joined an Arabic concert with most of the public would sigh in a thrill at certain turns of the voice. The podcast series Curious Ears explores how experienced listeners can convey their sensorial background, passion, and joy to a new listener. Let's get technical but personal, cognitive yet intuitive. A friend is sharing their musical intimacy with us. Enjoy. Is that okay for you?
That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It was partly inspired on your podcast, as you could probably hear.
There was something about reluctant, and I didn't understand that.
When your attention is reluctant to engage, like you start thinking about the groceries you have to buy next day if you don't really follow what's going on musically. Oh, I get your joke now. Great, thanks so much. I've been told we have to stop. Question for all three. Is there a song, track you always find yourselves listening to for the last minute?
Yes, but I won't tell you.
Ha! For the net podcast. One. Okay. Yeah? Eliana, you will tell us?
I'm thinking. Next.
We keep that as a secret for next time, so we have something to promise. Thank you so much for being remotely and physically around us. I really encourage the public, the viewers of streaming, or you can actually check this later as well. It's been recorded, to listen to those podcasts in your own time when you're sporting, traveling, whatever, cooking, and just get good quality sound and enjoy it. Thank you so much for following us. Next content at 8 o'clock on live streaming. Amin, Amel, Ibrahimi, the 7 valleys of El Masnawi, the Rumi cycle. Take care.